For all the shortcomings of the second Trump administration, the State Department have been doing fantastic work, trying to push for greater free speech and an end to mass migration into the UK and Europe. They have already put out a memo to the heads of state across the EU and to Keir Starmer last year saying that mass migration is a human rights violation because it causes white flight and will end up in the civilizational erasure of Europe where America has its roots. And over the last few days, they posted the following thread on X in response to their invitation to participate in the Global Compact on Migration at the United Nations. Now remember, the United Nations has its headquarters in America. It is funded disproportionately by the United States and also the UK. I think there's a very strong case to just withdraw funding at this point. But this roundtable was to bring heads of state together as stakeholders, as well as with a bunch of NGOs, to regulate the inflow of what they call irregular, but we would like to call illegal and unwanted, migration. Not that legal migration is less of a concern, that's just the point of this summit, to turn illegal migration into legal migration, to treat every single foreign criminal like a needy refugee fleeing the Holocaust in the 1930s and 40s. And the post outlines here that UN agencies systematically facilitated mass migration into America and Europe, even as citizens of these nations called for restrictions on migration. Now, the Global Compact's latest report urges nations to expand migration pathways and pursue regularization of migrants. We should withdraw from this organization. They're trying to subvert our country, our culture, abolish our borders, and turn the host heritage majorities of our nations, the indigenous populations that they won't even recognize, into hated minorities in our own homelands. And it just is unacceptable. UN agencies working with the NGOs they fund established a migration corridor through Central America and to the US border. This was the migrant caravans that were surging up during the Trump administration the first time around, and during the Biden administration, with the Biden administration calling for a surge at that border, opening said borders to demographically gerrymander the electorate, and resulting in at least 11 million illegal immigrants crossing into America atop the 10 to 20 existing illegal immigrants that were already in America, hence the call for mass deportations that won Trump the White House, and we'll be getting to updates on that policy very shortly. As the American people suffered under an unprecedented wave of mass migration, the UN was on the ground pipelining migrants to our southern border. UN officials greeted migrants along the route through the deadly Darien Gap. UN-funded NGOs handed out maps to migrants en route to the US. A similar thing seems to have happened during the 2015-2016 migrant crisis into Europe, where UN officials were walking around migrant camps at train stations in Hungary handing out maps, water bottles, and mobile phones. Presumably they got the funding to do so from European, British, and American taxpayers, thanks to the tendrils of USAID reaching out into these international NGOs that work to undermine our demographic security and our national sovereignty. As Europe endured the sustained migratory pressure, UN officials staffed all ends of the Mediterranean migration route, from the coast of Libya to the shores of the Aegean to the islands of Greece. Then, UN agencies condemned frontline states who refused to open their borders. This is happening again at the moment. Greece's migration minister, Thanos Plevris, warned that Greek authorities expect 550,000 migrants from North and Sub-Saharan Africa to surge through Libya, because they're currently waiting there, to break into the continent. And this is why it's particularly worrying that the Orban government's state of emergency in Hungary blocking illegal migrants has been ended by new President Peter Magyar. I know Magyar has promised to be stronger on legal migration than Orban's government were, because they were handing out temporary work visas to Indians and Bangladeshis, but I don't know, man. It's looking like they're not going to want to keep paying that fine to the European Court of Justice to not take in fake asylum seekers, and so Hungary might become the gateway by land for these migrants to get into Europe, while Greece becomes the pathway by sea. Anyway, Mr. Plevris told the Greek media outlet Voria, those who are not entitled to asylum will be detained. But do they have the capacity to do so? Because as it points out here, since 2015, Greece has been a major gateway for over 1.2 million illegal immigrants to flood into Europe, with many making their way into Britain via our porous border with Calais, despite having a literal moat around our country. We just lack the political will to restore our national and thereby demographic sovereignty by just deporting these people, by leaving any of the legal instruments that keep them here. And unfortunately, it looks like this is all going to be enabled with the help of the United Nations, as the State Department points out in this lengthy thread. While the United Kingdom faced unprecedented illegal boat crossings, UN agencies condemned plans for deportations. UN officials lobbied aviation regulators to prevent the deportation of migrants, an appalling violation of the UK's national sovereignty. So we have the United Nations lobbying our domestic aviation regulators to stop deportation flights. That is a hell of a revelation. The Global Compact on Migration claims to support safe migration. Well, it's not safe, as they point out, for the citizens of those Western nations, of the UK, because we have been subjected to untold numbers of sexual crimes, violent crimes, murders, the loss of life from men like Wayne Broadhurst, drummer Lee Rigby, all the girls at Manchester Arena, the girls at Southport, the victims of the Pakistani grooming gangs, on and on and on. There's a new migrant sex attack every day in the headlines now, from Afghans, Eritreans, the Sudanese killer of Rhiannon Skywhite. The list is never ending. The atrocities are just too many to count, and they never needed to happen. These men didn't need to be here. But the United Nations thinks that they should be your neighbours. They should be prowling around the gates of your children's schools. Oh, and by the way, if you speak about it, you're a racist. For the citizens of those Western nations, mass migration was never safe. It introduced new security threats, imposed financial strains, and undermined the cohesion of our societies. The United States will not legitimize global compacts that enable mass migration into America or Western nations. Under President Trump, the State Department will facilitate remigration, not replacement migration. Now, people pointed out this is an incredible shift in the rhetoric, with the White House crossing out replacement migration and putting remigration. Brilliant! We would really love to see the rhetoric backed up by policy, because although the Trump administration has made solid progress on legal migration, going below the cap of H-1Bs, despite hitting the cap last year, by placing a hefty fine on these visas that were used to undermine American laborers and replace American workers in things like entry-level jobs in tech firms at Amazon, Google, and Apple, or the plummet in southern border crossings, the plummet in refugee admissions except for white South African farmers. All those things are very, very good. It's got the Cato Institute's knickers in a twist, don't get me wrong. But mass legal migration is still happening. Record numbers of citizenship grants were being conducted under DHS, under Kristi Noem. She was bragging about it on Fox News. And it seems like mass deportations have stalled. I had a video about this a little while ago, covering the Mass Deportations Coalition's efforts to force the Trump administration to keep their campaign promise of mass deportations. It was popular with the electorate then. President Trump won a plurality of Hispanic males promising this policy, and whether or not it's popular, it's necessary. I think it's certainly a policy that deserved more political capital than the war in Iran, which hasn't gone as rosily as Netanyahu promised the Trump cabinet back when they were pushing for it, despite J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio being in the room saying, and I quote, "This is bullshit." Nevertheless, whether or not it's popular, whether or not you have political capital, it's necessary, because if you can't control your borders, you don't have a country. If the heritage majority of your nation, those descended from founding stock, to the we to whom the Constitution is self-evident, if they are no longer a majority, empowered in their politics, able to control who comes into their country, the progenitors of their culture, if they don't feel they belong in their own nation, then you're no longer that nation. And so mass deportations are imperative, as well as a comprehensive program of remigration, including many legal migrants who have been given protected status thanks to the 1990 Immigration Act passed by Republicans, or the 1965 Hart-Celler Act that brought lots of third worlders into America. If you don't reverse those policies, if you don't repeal them, if you don't send lots and lots of people home who will not reproduce American civilization, then you just don't have a country anymore. And it looks like that isn't going to happen. And I bring this reporting reluctantly, and hopefully to continue to pile pressure on from the outside so that our friends in the administration, the guys that are running in the State Department who actually care about this stuff, on the inside can say, here is this pressure, we need to fulfill our promises. And that pressure is both domestic and international, because I really want America to succeed. I love that country. It's our best invention. And I would like all of my friends to grow up in the nation that their forefathers built for them, not for random Somalians and Afghans and Hondurans. So So this is reporting in the New York Times, and I wouldn't usually reference the New York Times, but they do have some exclusive quotes here. Under the article, headlined, "Facing Pressure, Trump Officials Reject Claims They're Softening on Immigration." Unfortunately, Trump did tell members of his team to stop using the term mass deportations. Congressional Republicans on a retreat were told to stop using the term mass deportations. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, said, "We had a bit of a hiccup there with all of the protests in Minneapolis and Chicago, but we're getting back on track now. We're only focusing on criminal illegals." Bear in mind, every single illegal immigrant is a criminal. Instead, the strategy is moving towards not just messaging, but policy to rely on the cooperation of sanctuary states and cities to hand over illegal aliens with an additional criminal record that have already been apprehended. So that whittles down the eligible pool of deportations to the few thousand, when there are millions of illegal immigrants that are likely to be given amnesty by the forthcoming Democrat administrations, likely to win at this point if the Republicans keep failing on economics and immigration and focusing on foreign policy instead, and who are already imposing optional crimes and millions of dollars in costs, in social security fraud, in housing costs, in depreciating American wages onto American taxpayers, American voters, American citizens, heritage Americans. And so it's really frustrating when you're reading in these articles that White House officials are rejecting claims they're softening on mass deportations. Tom Homan has said, "This year will be a good year, mass deportations are coming." Markwayne Mullin, who's the new DHS secretary, said the department was not slowing down one bit. But ICE data shows a dip in arrests after the shooting of Renee Good and Alex Pretty, the liberals who got in the way of ICE, who threatened the lives of ICE officers with a firearm, with a car, because for some reason they were so obsessed with keeping Somalian scammers in Minneapolis, they laid down their lives for it. And a little bit of bad press, which the Trump administration were always going to get, because the press have never been fair to Trump, and they seem to have backed off the policy, including demoting the, albeit incompetent, Ice Barbie Kristi Noem, and basically, cucking Corey Lewandowski even more than Kristi Noem was actually cucking her own husband with that weird bimbo fetish. And instead they've replaced her with Markwayne Mullin, who said on Fox that, to Laura Ingraham, America has always been a nation of immigrants. It's just, oh man, we are so over this rhetoric. I'm over this rhetoric and I'm not even American. If I moved over to America, I would never be an American. I would still be an Englishman, and I am still ethnically and culturally more proximate to founding stock than any of the so-called new Americans via paperwork that have come in and, like Vivek Ramaswamy, keep explaining to you how your American heritage and your religion and your history and your political system has to include him. Actually, I'm even doing the head wobble. "We're not going into New York like another Minneapolis," Mullin said in an interview with Fox Business on Thursday. "We're going to go after the felons." Exactly. If you're only going after convicted criminal illegal aliens, then the pool for mass deportations whistles down to the few thousands. And this is showing up in the data because the latest publicly available ICE data, because DHS aren't even publishing full-scale deportations anymore, unfortunately self-deportations aren't the numbers advertised, because that's an extrapolation from a self-reported survey which has a sampling bias, because of course illegals in a hostile environment under the Trump administration are not going to respond to a survey and say, "Yeah, I'm here illegally, here I am, come get me," unless they really don't like their mother-in-law and they want to get rid of her. I remember that TikTok, it was very funny. Instead, the latest available ICE data through early April shows daily average arrests have dropped to 1,000 from a peak of 1,500 in January amid the crackdown in Minnesota. That 1,000 arrests a day was admittedly 4 times higher than during the last year of the Biden administration, when only 250 people a day were detained by ICE. But you're only 4 times better than the government that allowed in 11 million illegals and many more legals. I'm sorry, that's just not good enough to conduct mass deportations, to reverse America's dire demographic fortunes. It's not rolling back the revolution that your enemies have already waged. Instead, it's inadvertently consolidating its gains and ensuring that certain states will be locked down as Democrat strongholds, and in the future, there's going to be a demographic supermajority vote for whichever party promises amnesty for illegals, mass immigration, and anti-white, redistributive, retributive politics. During the first year of the Trump administration, the second Trump administration, the government deported 230,000 people. That's enforced returns. And they're also tacking on another 270,000 border apprehensions. But actually, internal apprehensions and deportations in America are only 230,000. And so, if you're looking at that self-deportation figure and realizing it's inflated, it can't be trusted, if DHS aren't putting out better statistics, and they've only taken 230,000 people out, but 11 million people came in, atop 10 to 20 million already, then it's not doing enough. You're bailing out the ship with a bucket, while the gaping hole in the hull continues to flood water in. Like, if your house is flooded, this is basically akin to turning off the taps, opening a window, and bailing the water out with a teaspoon until you decide to just tell the homeowners, sit in a rubber duck and float. I'm sorry, people want all the water gone from their house so they can live in the house again, and at the moment it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And the other alarming thing is there's a piece in The Atlantic saying that Stephen Miller has been sidelined. Now again, you have to take all of this with a pinch of salt. We remember the leaks from last year that tried to make Vance and the War Cabinet look really, really bad with the signal leaks that were published in The Atlantic. Nevertheless, it is alarming that these are the signals coming out the White House, coinciding with a shift in messaging and a drop in actual deportation numbers. White House insiders said Miller remains a top advisor to the president, he has a singular relationship to Trump built over the last decade, and that his job is not in jeopardy. The president loves Stephen. This is White House Communications Director Stephen Chung, the absolute unit that stared down Xi Jinping this week, speaking, and the White House staff respects him tremendously. But Trump, who previously joked that Miller's truest feelings are so extreme they should not be aired publicly, remember he was circulating copies of the Camp of the Saints among his staff, so, he's pretty on side. He has told others in recent weeks he understands Miller sometimes goes too far, advisors told us. This will be Susie Wiles, because Susie Wiles and Stephen Miller don't like each other. Also, Brooke Rawlins has been lobbying over the Department of Agriculture for an amnesty for farm workers. I've spoken to someone working in Department for Ag. That was the case right from the beginning of the administration. And then the Chamber of Commerce, Wall Street, various figures in the Treasury are all saying mass deportations will hurt our bottom line, they'll raise the price of wages at the time that inflation is also going up. Do you want an economic disaster on your hands, Mr. President? And so it seems that Trump is currently bottling it. I really don't deliver this news with any joy, but again, I'm speaking to people in the administration, and someone quite senior who is also on the ground in DC, who is friends with people across departments, who really wants this thing to succeed, just texted me the other week and said, it looks like the admin's cooked. And I really don't want that to be the case, because we benefit from stuff that the State Department is doing. And I would like for that sort of work to continue across the span of decades. We're going to need an administration that is conducting mass deportations in America to back up mass deportations in Britain come 2028, 2029. I don't want a Democrat government in charge, but I also don't want a weak Republican government blocking the possibility of an actual America First, MAGA administration. Unfortunately, it looks like it's going that way. And this is not me saying, you're going to wear your fooled again pins. This is not me saying, MAGA is dead. It's not my place to pronounce that. I'm simply trying to encourage Americans to regain possession of their country and for the administration to get back on track. And there aren't encouraging signals in this article that that's going to be the case, because in here it says Tom Homan has said that he speaks with new DHS Secretary Markwayne Mullin every day, several times a day, and that Miller speaks with Mullin regularly, according to a White House official. And in a statement for this story, Mullin told us he works closely with both Homan and Miller. Everyone's on the same page, he assured. But there is another source, a senior administration official, saying the new DHS secretary is listening to Tom Homan and Rodney Scott before he is ever listening to Stephen Miller, despite having daily briefings. And so, Homan, who has been spooked by the reaction in Minneapolis to ICE, and is saying, we need to focus on the violent criminals first, so shifting in messaging, and seemingly the policy is following the messaging with fewer ICE deportations, despite previously saying, which everyone applauded for, families will be deported together, we're coming for you, we're kicking down your door. He was the bulldog. Instead, it seems like Homan is softening, Miller is being more robust, and all of the internal lobbyists, the advisors, the economic pressures, maybe Trump himself, Markwayne Mullin, Tom Homan are icing Stephen Miller out. And so it's really not encouraging when you hear quotes like this. In the end, Stephen is the one who comes up with new ideas, a former official said. As much as everyone loves Tom Homan, he's not going to say, here's a unique authority we could use to do X, Y, and Z, but the president likes Homan's approach at the moment. So Stephen Miller is coming up with novel ideas to get around the courts, to get around blockages in Congress, to get around the lobbyists. And instead, Homan is thinking like a man within the system, within the paradigm that doesn't want deportations to get done. Trump is listening to Homan, less so Stephen Miller, and so deportations aren't getting done. And unless something changes, they're not going to get done. Also, Miller has not backed away from his own views on immigration, including H-2B visas. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that said that Congressman Andy, I forget his surname now, that spoke at CPAC Hungary recently, was lobbying Trump on behalf of the lobster industry in his congressional district to keep H-2B seasonal workers. These are the farm workers that are here legally. There's also lots of illegal farm workers, and despite plans to not fulfill the cap, suddenly after Andy did the lobbying, that the cap was fulfilled. It's Andy Harris. He's even got a statement about it on his website, and he is a congressman for Maryland. So it's not Maine, but it's still supporting and apparently internally lobbying the hitting of the cap for H-2B visas so we can use cheap foreign labour to pick lobsters. I somehow think Americans would be willing to do so if you paid them enough. And so it seems like economic pressures are continuing mass legal migration while illegal migration is not being addressed. Stephen Miller, in 2017, emailed then Labour Secretary Alex Acosta an article about rising wages in Maine, which is where the lobster industry is, after a shortage of H-2B visas, saying markets work. Basically, we can raise the wages of Americans. We can empower the American worker if we don't keep importing cheap foreign labour. Well, now the H-2B visa cap has been fulfilled for the last year, Miller took to social media to say we shouldn't be importing a foreign labour class. So you can see the contours of a power struggle for the future of the Trump administration, its political priorities, whether or not to go hard on mass deportations or back off before the midterms because they think it's going to be costly, but for some reason, the unpopular Iran war and rising inflation and saying, this is a terrible soundbite from Trump, but I don't really care about Americans' economic futures, apparently that's not too costly. This is really frustrating to watch from the outside, and it's all well and good to have the rhetoric of not replacement migration, which is an actual UN policy, even though they said it was unsustainable, but remigration instead. It's great to have that rhetoric. It's all good to have the graphics, but you need the policy to back it up. And so I'm encouraging it, guys. Heritage Americans, get your country back. Please, we need you to, and we need your help. The motherland has fallen, as you keep telling me. Well, I don't like to see our best colony fall either. But regarding the rhetoric, great to hear. But until there's policy to back it up, I'll believe it when I see it.